Well, good evening, everybody. It is Tuesday. Welcome to A Flawed Man of God. My name is Stuart Davis. I'm a deacon at a small church that's outside of Richmond, Virginia. I'm not trying to get you to join my church or donate to any special cause. I'm not a pastor. I haven't been to seminary, and I'm not a biblical scholar. What I am is I consider myself an average day to day Christian, just in the Word, just reading the Bible, trying to make sense of everything that comes my way through the lens of a Christian. That's somebody who wants to do a better job following Christ and being an example of Him. So, if you are interested in starting a relationship with Jesus, welcome to the program. You are welcome here, and I encourage you to participate. Give me your thoughts and feelings. Same thing if you are currently a Christian and you just want to react to what is being said and what's being read through, put that stuff in the chat. I do not have that big of a following right now. So if you put a chat in there, I guarantee you're going to get read unless it's something completely obscene or you're a spammer, you will get blocked. With that said, I have with me somebody I've been excited about bringing on. He has been a guy who first introduced me to the idea of apologetics. He spoke at a men's retreat some years ago, and I ended up being able to reconnect with him recently. And he does he has his own podcast, his own YouTube channel, Dyer Conversations. This is Mr. Billy Dyer. Welcome to the program, sir.
Hey, thanks for having me on. I appreciate it. I'm excited to be here.
Yes. Yes. And Billy and I were talking about possibly doing some further collaborations after this episode. But we gotta wait until schedules start to free up a little bit, and we'll put something forward. But tonight's discussion is something that I feel is very important, and you've heard me mention it before. We've had Eric Rollon on talking about kind of his take on and sharing his brand of apologetics. But the thing that I think is one of the most pressing things for us tonight is, or these days, is teaching our kids and preparing them for life on their own and in a way that they can kind of keep their faith and defend it when it's challenged, because we know it's going to be challenged once they get out in the media and on college campuses everywhere. So, um, Billy, why don't you kind of give us your take on apologetics?
Yeah. So when I first started really going to church when I was almost 18 years old, it was mostly because there was somebody I was interested in dating. And that was really the only place I could see her. So I was going to church a lot. At that time, I really didn't care. Once we broke up, I left for a while and then I had some people reach out to me. So it brought me back. And one of the things I started to do was I started to really contemplate, this whole idea of Christianity because, I was raised in America. So of course it's not the first time I've ever heard of it. And we went to church some when I was a kid, but I was starting to think to myself, like, okay, if like, if I'm going to do this whole Christian thing, like it needs to be real. Like I don't need religion. I don't need this. This is just a waste of time. I'd much rather go off and just be a heathen than try to, come to church. Like, what's the point of that? And so I started to ask questions like, how do we know this is true? How do we know, uh, that Buddhism isn't true, or how do we even know there's a God? And what about the Bible? Hasn't it been changed? And why should we trust it? All those questions. Now, luckily, I was around a group of Christians who had some answers, who welcomed my challenges and people who challenged me back. So that set me on a kind of a path of studying. And, I got to a point where I was like, okay, this is legit. And if it's legit, then that means I need to follow it because the consequences are terrible. I mean, that was the original mindset. Now, of course, it's changed now to where I've fallen in love with God and with Jesus. And so that's my motivator now. But, at first it's like, I don't want to go to hell. So, yeah, I need to get out of that. Once I became a Christian in 2003, it's just one of those things where I just never stopped studying. I just constantly wanted to read and learn the next thing because I was wanting to tell everybody like, hey, this thing is real. And then people would ask me questions and I would not know how to answer them. So then I'd have to go read and figure it out. And that was back in the early 2000s. and it's only gotten worse in the
Okay.
sense of people in our culture who don't trust Christianity. They don't trust the Bible. They don't think God is real. Not even now where they tolerate it and they're like, well, that's your thing, whatever, I'll do my thing. It's like now it's something that they're trying to extinguish, they're trying to put out. They're trying to, they cancel, you can't have those people talking about that stuff like traditional marriage and all these things. We gotta squash them down. And so if Christians aren't prepared to deal with that, we're not going to have a place to stand in the marketplace. And when the cancel culture comes, they're going to cancel you because, well, you're just saying crazy things and you have no reason to back them up. And they're going to stand on the side that makes them look like they're the side of science. They're the side of facts. They're the side of evidence. They're the side of reason. And we're just these mystics or these people who, believe in fairy tales or need a crutch in order to get through the daily life that we can't, get through without believing in the spaghetti monster in the sky. So, we need apologetics, extremely bad, today. There's so many people who I talk to who have no idea why they believe in God. And I'm just sitting there going, you're just like one interaction away, one interaction with a halfway educated atheist from losing your faith.
Yeah.
So apologetics is commanded in the Bible. People don't really understand that. So let's say this right off the bat. Apologetics, what is that? Right. So apologetics comes from the Greek word apologia, which means to give an answer or a defense. It doesn't mean to apologize. It means to give a reasoned answer for whatever it is that you're trying to stand for. So 1 Peter 3:15 is a pretty staple verse that people go to a lot, where Peter says that we need to set Christ apart in our hearts and to always as Lord and always be ready to give an answer for the hope that is in us. So that's the word apologia. We have to be ready to give an answer to people of why we believe in God, why we believe in the Bible, why we believe that Jesus rose from the dead. And then if you think about Jesus, and he said, what's the greatest commandment? To love the Lord your God with all your heart, soul, mind, and strength. And I always tell people, God doesn't give brownie points for stupid Christians. Like he doesn't give you brownie points because you have an unintelligent faith. That's not something that he rewards. Now, it doesn't mean that everybody has to be a scholar, but faith, I mean, this is a whole conversation in of itself, but faith, the concept of faith that we have in the church today is so unbiblical. This idea that it's a blind leap in the dark, or that, well, in spite of evidence, I believe this thing. Like, that's not what biblical faith is. Biblical faith is that you see evidence, you reason it out and go, okay, based off of what I see, I will trust in what I can't see, you
Right.
know? So it's like, for example, you believe that Jesus forgave you of your sins. You didn't see that. Like when I became a Christian, I didn't see some sort of document. God didn't give me a document that said your sins are forgiven. There wasn't no vision I got. Why do I trust that my sins are actually forgiven? Because of the evidence I do see that makes me trust in the Bible, that makes me trust in the historical reliability of, this man named Jesus who died and rose from the dead. And so if he is who he says he is, and he did what he said he did, then I'm going to trust that he forgave me of my sins if I obey the gospel. So I think there's just a lot of misunderstandings in the church as far as how you're supposed to live the Christian faith, how you're supposed to relate to God, and what it means to actually have faith, and which is why people don't understand what apologetics is. They think it's like this Johnny come lately thing of, well, I don't need apologetics. I believe the Bible. If the Bible says it, I believe it. It's like, cool. Your grandkids don't. So you're willing to just let them go to hell because you don't need apologetics, because they got questions and you can't answer them, but you don't need apologetics.
Yeah.
No. And it's like, the first century Christians, they were all doing apologetics. Go just read Justin Martyr, go read Tertullian, go read Origen, go read Irenaeus. What are all these guys doing? They're talking to skeptics and going, here's why you're wrong. Here's why Christ really rose from the dead. So, apologetics is not anything new.
Yeah, it was, well, again, that was the funny thing, because I was at the retreat and you got up there and you started talking and I'd never heard of it before. And it said Christian apologetics. And I'm like, oh, here we go. This is somebody who wants to teach us how to apologize for our faith and how do we even, and then you started talking. And then I go, oh, this is different. I like this. This is very important. This speaks to me because anybody who's, especially when you're in your late teens and early 20s and you're interacting with people. And that was back in, you were talking about like early 2000s. That's the same time, I was, that was the age of the instant messenger and the
Mhm.
all the different messenger platforms, or AOL online and ICQ and all these other things that were going on. And you could get it and message boards. They were all very popular, and there was a bit of faith blood sports in there, where the smug atheist would come on and talk about, oh yeah, well, I mean, that's it's so debunked. The Catholic Church controlled how the Bible was written, and they got to throw out what they only picked and translated what they wanted to, and there's no way you can trust in all these. And these are points where I found myself, was like, yeah, but I was like, okay, I don't really have a response to you other than I have faith that if God had a will that we were going to get past this, that that things would turn out the way that they were supposed to. And that's kind of where I am now. And that's where, but once you get to that, your camera just cut
Yeah,
off.
let's see. I don't know why I just did that. Let me try to cut this thing back on. Ah.
You're back on.
Yeah, sorry about that. I don't know what happened there.
Yeah, well, this is also a somewhat maiden voyage on a live stream, I think, for your camera, right?
Yeah, yeah, it is. It's all good though.
Yeah.
Hey, we're
Well,
imperfect people. We're flawed men.
look, this is a place for flawed things to happen. Look, we're on YouTube. YouTube's got all sorts of weird things going on. So, but those are the things I was confronted with. But and this is also the other thing that happened when you're not, because a lot of people, they go off to college, they stop going to church because they're doing the college thing, right? At least while you're away from college, most folks they're not doing that, right? And so that's what I learned when I did walk away from church for a while. Though mine were for different reasons. When you do walk away from church for a while, when I came back, I realized how off center I was. Kind of, the military person, it's like zeroing a rifle. Like if it's, if you're not sighted correctly on your rifle, you're not going to shoot straight. And that's how I felt. I was like, man,
Mhm.
I've really drifted, and I need to, and it wasn't like what I was hearing was a new revelation to me. It was stuff that it was reminding me of, like, hey, this is why you believe the things that you believe. And I realized at that point, I was like, okay, this is why church is important. This is, I said for years church wasn't important. But when you're a college student, you're not thinking about that, and you're confronted with all these different ideas, and then people bring those things to you because they want you to accept different things on why sexual promiscuity is okay. Why, um, you know, alcoholism, to drink as much alcohol, do whatever is mind altering to the point where you don't have control over yourself. It's all okay. All this hedonism, I think that's probably the biggest thing about college, hedonism, that you're confronted with. Those folks don't want to be called out. And this is back in the 2000s. It's only gotten worse. But people don't like to be called out on their sins. And what we see nowadays in colleges and in high schools, even now, is that they want to make it. They act like it's a hate crime that you have a faith that with opinions that differ from what is supposed to be mainstream, or what they think is mainstream.
Mhm. Yeah, indeed. Cancel culture is real, and everything is tolerated except for your view.
Yeah. So one of the things that me and um my partner on doing middle school Sunday school, we have tried to approach things that will interest the middle schoolers. It's a difficult age to get people engaged. They're not confident enough, I think, in some points, to want to speak up and give an opinion. And they're not small enough where you can, do something that's really like a fun childish activity. They're really not into it as much, so it's difficult to find there. But I think that's the place where it really needs to start. Where you really need to getting them um, prepared, because I think that the the exposure to things is only getting younger, right? I come across people that they're only being confronted with these things at a younger age than they were.
Yeah. So when I was in Maryland, I actually got connected with this group called Ratio Christi, which is Latin for Reasons in Christ,
Hmm.
Reasons for Christ. And what they were is they were a campus ministry. So, you would have these different chapters across the nation. And I became chapter director at Morgan State University, which is a predominantly, I don't think that they were solely, but it was like a 95% predominantly Black college, which is, I was like, whatever, I don't care. I'm
Yeah.
going into inner city Baltimore to, I mean, in the college, it's not just because it was in Baltimore. I mean, that's how they were started. I think they were started as an all Black college, and they might have had some other um, people there. But anyways, so I was going there and I was doing apologetics with Ratio Christi, and I can remember that the guy who was kind of like one of my first attenders who loved it. We got to talking one day, and he said, what's funny about the Black culture? And I was like, what? And he goes, they got faith in Jesus, but they don't connect it with their morals at all.
Hmm.
And I was like, what? And he was like, yeah, they have all sorts of faith in Jesus in the sense of like, I believe in him and he's there and I'll pray to him, whatever. But I'll go sleep with these girls on the weekend, or I'll smoke some weed, or I'll do this and I'll do that. And I'm like, all right, well, that's an issue you got to confront, like, what do you do
Yeah.
there? And then I remember meeting with some of the regional directors with Ratio Christi, and they were talking about how they were moving it into chapters that would be in high schools. And then they were talking about moving it into chapters that were in middle schools, because they were like, we just realized, like, we used to say, oh, we got to get into the colleges because by the time people become 25 and 30, if they're not in church, like, it's very little likelihood that they'll ever come back. And then they were like, oh man, we're in colleges and we got to get in high schools. Like, if we're not in high schools, then they're definitely going to walk away in college. And then they're like, man, we got to get to middle schools,
I
like, these
know.
kids are getting deconverted in middle school. So, I mean, for anybody who's out there who cares at all about the kingdom of God, it's like, hey, listen, if the enemy is attacking you at a certain place, you need to go defend that place.
Hmm.
You can't just be like, well, I mean, we're going to defend the front gates, not the side gates. Well, if they're
Right.
coming in the side gates, go to the side gates,
And there and we can't expect kids to be able to defend themselves at that point. I mean, that's
No.
part of our responsibility as adults, as parents. I mean, we love our kids. I'm my kids are still elementary school age, and it's something that concerns me because YouTube is a thing, and there are weird ideas, and I mean, I remember being in high school. I had when Kid Rock's first CD, and it's a middle finger on the CD, and my dad found it, and it was just like a whole thing, right? And but that was the thing. You weren't supposed to be listening to it. You knew you weren't supposed to be listening to it, and it was just that was the taboo that you were like, well, I'm listening to part of your rebellion, or it was cool, or whatever it was.
Hmm.
Same thing with Eminem and all the other things that folks in my demographic and age group at that time were listening to. And nowadays, now all the people my age are have kids like I do, and many of them don't care what their kids are listening to when they're
Hmm.
like, well, I'm going to jam out to whatever. If my kid hears it, that's fine. I was fine. I heard it and I was fine. They don't really understand the difference between when you're listening to it and you're not supposed to be listening to it. And now well, mom's listening to this and jamming out to it on the way to drop me off from school, or we're on the way to the grocery store soccer practice. So that just means all this stuff is okay. And I think that's one of the most. I mean, that when you act it out in front of your kids, that's giving them tacit approval for it. And I think that's one of the places we slip: music and TV.
Yeah, yeah. So I have one kid, and I noticed that she picks up on stuff I do all the time. And she's still super young. She's still a baby, but it's crazy that kids have a memory that's like a vault. And they will remind you of something that you said a while back. It's like, I don't remember saying that. Like, oh no, you said it. So I mean, they're paying attention and they see the sort of life you're living. And I think that's why. I really think that's why the Bible says that an elder has to be able to rule his household well, because a man in his house, that's him at his his real core. That's who he really is. Like
Mhm.
you could be one way at work or even at church or with your friends, but when you go home, like that's who you really are. And that's really a test of if a man is seeking after God or not, in my opinion.
Well, I think that's very poignant when you look at Solomon, right? Very godly person. Um, one of the great figures in the Bible. Not a perfect man by any measure, but one that who had think about people who actually impress God. Solomon is one of them, and he's this wise ruler. Not so wise with the ladies, not so wise with making listening to them or not listening to them specifically. But you wonder because once Solomon goes, Judah has some good kings. Israel has no good kings.
Mm-hmm.
Zero. And you think about that, the consequences of not setting your kid. You can't control all of your kids' decisions. You ultimately they are going to make their own. They are going to make their own way. But it's up. I mean, but do you want to be on the back end of that? Going, I should have done more. I could have done more, and actually being able to say, yeah, there was a lot I could have done, or you're saying it because you just want it so bad for them to follow in your footsteps in the faith way. I think that's the fear of me. From one of my biggest fears, um, as as a as a parent. Right? As a parent, my biggest fear is that my kid is not going to follow in my footsteps, or at least I want them to be at least as spiritual as me or better. I want to be that my dream would be to for them to be better than me to the point where they're guiding me almost, and they're
Mm-hmm.
teaching me. Maybe that happens, maybe that doesn't, but I don't want to see them fall into apostasy or fall into atheism and just be one of these cringy people that you see, talking about how, oh yeah, I grew up in the church and they're all a bunch of idiots and my parents are backwards and all this other stuff going on. Because I I worry. I was like, did I not set an example as a as a parent today for God that I should have? And is this going to come back to bite me? Those are the parts we really get into that can keep me awake at night. Um, and that's what I guess that's where when we talk about introducing kids in middle school age to apologetics, what are we looking at? Like what's the basic? Where do we lay the foundation for apologetics?
Yeah, so, one of the things you learn whenever you're beginning to teach the Bible, like as I went to seminary and stuff, and so that, one of the things I always point out is know your audience, right? Like know your audience and know the context of where you're going. Like, are you speaking to a crowd of 1,000 Bible college students? Or are you speaking to a crowd of 100 elderly people? Are you speaking to 10 people who are 30 years old? Are you speaking to, 7-year-olds? You're going to
Yeah,
use some different language. You might say the same thing. You're just going to say it a little bit differently.
right.
So, with middle schoolers, like, yeah, you're not going to get super deep, right?
Mhm.
But they're not stupid. And, I did youth ministry for years. And when I first started, I told the kids, I said, hey, listen, I told this to the high schoolers specifically, but I reiterated it to the middle schoolers. And I was like, you're studying trigonometry and calculus and physics and engineering. And, you're building things in shop class. And like, don't tell me you can't learn what justification means, you know? Like, don't sit here and, I'm not going to sit here and act like you're an idiot and you can't understand how the Bible was formed together. If you can understand how an atom works,
Right.
it's like, no, I'm not buying that. I never bought that. And people do that with adults. Like when you go preach them, like, well, I don't, they're relatively newer to the faith. You can't go too deep with them. Like, they're not an idiot. They're 37 years old. The guy's a doctor, whatever. Like, I don't, he's a CEO or what, like, the guy's not a moron. I'm going to teach him stuff and I'm going to lead him along, in his ability. Like, I'm not going to jump into eschatology the first day, but the guy's not a moron. So I treat middle schoolers the same way. Like, you're not stupid.
Right.
Um, but you start with the basics. You think about the things that they're learning in school, right? I mean, okay, if you're going through school and this is what you're learning, then if I'm teaching you something that's about that complex, then I should be fine. You know, I mean, again, I don't think it's that difficult for a middle schooler to understand the difference between justification and sanctification. I mean, they've seen people get in trouble. You ever seen somebody go to the principal's office? Uh-huh. You know how
Yeah.
they got punished? Uh-huh. Yeah, that's like the wrath of God. Like, do you want to make sure the wrath of God doesn't expel you into hell? Okay. Like, you can make those connections. Yeah, they're a little bit crude and rude or whatever around the edges, but you refine those as they get older and you help them to understand the more nuanced perspective of it. So, when it comes to apologetics, am I going to be, talking to them about abiogenesis and, those like deep technical things about how the starlight works and how that relates to the age of the universe? Like, no, I'm not going to get into that. But, can I talk to them about whether the Bible's been changed or not? I mean, listen, I have a beautiful illustration that I mean, I stole it from somebody else, so it's not
Oh
original
yeah.
with me, but it's like if you have a phone and you text people, have you ever made a typo? Yeah. Has phone ever auto-corrected, a word into a different word and you're like, and then you got to send an updated text to correct that? Like that's just like Bible manuscripts. Like relate it to them on their level. Like, okay, so you had to send 3 texts because you kept making typos. Do you think the person understood what you meant? Yeah. Okay. So there's some variance in the manuscripts. Big deal.
Yeah.
We could still figure out what the original text was. And then as they progress, then you can talk to them about, okay, well, here's what the scribal transmissions were like, and here's how these manuscripts were made, and then the codex, and like what's the historical background behind these codexes that were put together. And you could get more technical as they get older, but you could start off with the basics to them.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? It's I don't know. I just don't buy into the fact that when you are, 12, 14, 16 years old, that you're an idiot. Like, no, I have
Right.
nieces and nephews and they're not stupid. So,
No, they might not have confidence in that they're going to give the right answer. And I think that's what
sure.
I run into the most part. They're quiet. They're like, what is he looking for me to say? Because I try to do the same thing, and that makes me feel better. I try to make it relatable, right? And I try to put, and it helps because with these kids, I know most of their parents, um,
Mhm.
and I know that they're mostly from stable households, so I get this. I can go out there without worry about stepping too wrong and going, look, your parents love you, and it's much easier to put the perspective of God's love for you as it's just like your parents love you, okay? But he's the God of everything, right? So you think that he has the way your parents worry about you and the way your parents structure your life with rules and guidelines and everything. That's more easily relatable for them when we're going through the Old Testament. But like, look, there are rules. There are rules that you have to follow, and sometimes you get punished, and it's not always. When you get outside into the real world, some punishments are very, very real. But this is why we're doing it.
Well, I mean, that brings up the point. It's like, when do you know it's appropriate to try to dive into a topic? Well, it's like if a kid's asking a question about it, then I think it's pretty decent to start at least venturing down that area and talking about it. And I mean, listen, I'm not just talking like in theories. I mean, I've been doing this for 2 decades now. So I was I substituted for a Christian school in Maryland for a little bit, and they were middle schoolers, and one day I had to go into their religion class, and they were like, "Hey, you could teach a lesson if you want to, or you could just let them do their homework." And I was like, "Okay, I'm going to teach a lesson." So, I went in there and I presented to them. If anybody's familiar with the apologetics world, I presented to them the minimal facts argument for the resurrection of Jesus.
Mhm.
I said, "Hey, look, guys. Okay, let's imagine we are investigators and we're going to a crime scene." And they're all like, "Okay, cool." And I'm like, "Okay, there's 5 pieces of evidence that we have." And I wrote them out on the whiteboard. And I was like, "Okay, you know, the tomb was empty. Okay, we know that for a fact." Did I get into how we know that for a fact? No, because they're middle schoolers, right? That's a fact. The disciples believed that they saw Jesus rise from the dead. Saul was changed into Paul. And then James, the Lord's brother, He changes what, like I'm going through these facts and then I'm going, okay, now I'm going to give you like 7 possible explanations for this. And so I put like 7 explanations up and I explained each one. Here's what the hallucination theory is. Here's what the swoon theory is. Here's what this theory is. And I was like, what does this one not answer? And they were going, oh, it doesn't tell you why the tomb was empty. Okay, well, what about the hallucination theory? It doesn't tell you why Paul was converted. You know what I mean? I'm walking through it, and then
Oh,
I'm
yeah.
like,
And you're engaging them into it.
yeah, and I'm like, the resurrection, it explains all 5, and they're like, yeah, it sure does. Now, are there further questions with that? Yeah, sure, there's going to be further questions, but I gave them a baseline to start with. They understood it. So, I mean, we do the same thing with the Bible. We don't not teach kids the Bible until they're 20. We start off with very simplified Bible stories, very, basic level. And then as I get older, we start getting a little bit more technical with it. So that's how I approach when I teach kids stuff with apologetics.
No, I think, yeah, getting their mind working. The more they think that it's a game, I think that's a proof for even adults. I know that's good for me, always make it a game, but especially for them, it gets them kind of going from, oh man, I'm in boring class. Okay, I just need to make it through here. I'm thinking about, do I have a baseball game later on or something like that going on? And instead they're like, oh, okay, now they're paying attention. And then one of the things that I run, that's the part that gets me, is just getting them to ask questions, getting them to ask questions. Because I want to respond. I want to respond, but they're like, uh-huh, uh-huh. Like, please tell me you're getting this. Please tell me you're getting this. But that's middle
Yeah.
school.
Middle schoolers are like that. They might soak
Yeah.
up more than you think they are, though.
Yeah, well, that's just my hope. It's like, I hope they're been, and I always ask the parents, it's like, are they getting anything? Do they think that I'm boring? I don't want to be boring. I don't. That's the. I don't want to be boring. I don't want to be wrong, and I don't want to be boring. But that's middle schoolers. It is an awkward time. And you can talk to adults about things and get a little bit more rational perspective. But I think the weirdest, or at least my assumption here would be, the hardest group would be the college kids. The I know so much. I'm such an intellectual, and I'm exposed, and I don't want to be, I don't want to I don't want to have an unpopular opinion, and I've got professors who tell me that all this stuff is true and all this other stuff. How does the approach change with apologetics when you're talking to college level students who aren't going in, who aren't really involved in um a Christian, like, they're kind of on the peripheral, like they're Christians, but they're not going to the different outreach groups. They're just, how do you approach those folks?
Yeah. So when I approach kids at that age who aren't really connected to any sort of, church or church organization, you can't come at them like, hey, here's what's right, because they're already like rebellious, and they're already in a mindset of, I'm at a place in my life where I am beginning to have an opportunity to reinvent myself. For the first, like, you grew up in school. Most kids grow up in the same district for their elementary, middle, and then high school. So they see the same kids their whole life growing up. And then they go off to college and it's like, hey, this is a chance for me to be somebody kind of different and shed that baggage or what I did when I was in middle school that they still remember when I was in 12th grade. And,
So relate
you
to
know,
that.
yeah, you know what I mean? And like, so, you're in that mindset. Plus, your ego is developing, and you're at a point where just enough to get arrogant, but you don't know enough to know that you don't know anything. Right. And I
Yes.
mean, we all go through that. And, I remember hearing older people say that when I was younger, and now I'm the old guy saying that back to the younger people. And so if you come at a person like that, direct, hard, and like, I'm right, you're wrong, or I'm right, just listen to me. I don't know where you stand, but I just have something to tell you. You gotta, like, it's not often going to work out. So generally what I like to do is I like to take an indirect approach. And I don't want to sound like I'm being manipulative. I like to think of it as more strategic. and like I'm setting a trap for them, but it's a trap to save their life
Right.
rather than like a trap to hurt them.
Well, you're
So,
talking about how do I, because you're talking about a generational difference, right? You're
mhm,
not talking about, doing something to trick somebody, but how do I talk to a person in a way that they will listen to me? And
yeah.
I don't think that's necessarily manipulative. I think it's just
Yeah,
trying
so
to be.
so one of the things that you learn when you start to study logic or debates is whoever makes the claim has the onus or the responsibility to defend that claim. So, if I was to ask somebody a question like, "Do you believe in God?" and they said no, it's not my responsibility to prove to them why they're wrong. It's their responsibility to prove why their position is right. And I think Christians who get excited about evangelizing sometimes jump too fast into the offensive of I got all these facts, I got all these arguments, all these things I've gone through my head. Let me if I could just vomit them onto you, then you're going to be converted. And it's like, well, that's not really how it works. So, hey, do you believe in God? No. Okay. What led you to that position? Like
Mhm.
we get challenged as Christians. Well, the Bible's been changed. God isn't real. Or what about all these other gods? Or what about the? It's like, and I have to defend that. And I have to defend that. Okay, well, you know what? You defend your position. Why don't you believe in God? Oh, you think the Bible's been changed? That's interesting. What made you think that? Oh well, all these things have been changed. All the manuscripts they have errors. Oh, okay. Can you show me where has it been changed at? Where are the manuscripts that you've looked at? In what you're starting to do, and you're not doing it, arrogantly, and you're not trying to do it condescendingly. But what you're doing is you're beginning to show their vulnerability that they only believe those things because they've heard somebody say it. They actually haven't done their own investigation. They haven't done their own
Right.
research. And so once I start kind of going down that and begin to, they, you know, they know it without me having to point out to them that your position you can't defend. You may be right, but you can't defend it. So now you should, if you're an honest person, be willing to talk to me if I say, okay, well, I have some things that I believe would lead me to the conclusion that God does exist and that the Bible hasn't been changed. Would you be willing to look at those with me? Or that's, okay, you don't believe God exists. That's interesting. So one of the things that made me think that God exists is, and then I can go into the cosmological argument, right? And be like, there's got to be some sort of creator. How would you explain how space, time, and matter all came into existence and are coextensive with each other? Like,
Right.
how do you explain that? You know what I mean? And then they start to realize, like, oh, well, now they're stumbling over their words. And so if you do that as more of an indirect route, it doesn't meet that ego to ego, and you're not, I mean, because you don't want to embarrass somebody, like,
You're
hey,
challenging without
yeah,
necessarily calling them out, like you would call them out, like call them an idiot. It'd be like, well, this is why I believe it. Why do you believe the other way? You're
hmm
kind of just putting the ball in their court at that point.
and you got to think about the sort of culture we're in now too, right? I mean, we're in a culture where literally this blew my mind when I first started thinking about this. I read it in a book. This is the first generation in history where preachers have to realize that as you are preaching, people are Googling to fact check you. I mean, just a generation ago. I mean, when I first started coming to church, I could not do that during a sermon.
I've
But
done it.
but literally now, I've done it too. But literally now, as you're preaching, if you say something, somebody could literally be like half listening to you, half Googling to see whether what you said is true or not. And that's the culture we live in now, which is, I mean, that's good and bad. But information is now, disseminated by so many different means. And we don't just have to rely on that one, authority figure who has told us this is the way things are. It's like, okay, well, I hear you, but I'm going to go look at YouTube and I'm going to see whether what you say, if there's any other views or contradictions or, or things like this. So,
That's
um,
Pandora's box right there.
yeah, no, but it is, but that's the way people function. And
Yeah.
so, you have to understand that's the mindset of the kids is that, I say kids, the young people is that they're okay going and fact checking and, doing research. So I challenge them because I know I've been, again, studying this for 20 years. I know where the facts lie. I know what the evidence says. It's overwhelming in support of Christianity. I know where the hard questions are. I know where my unanswered questions are. That's okay. You're never going to have all your questions answered, but if you challenge them, hey, look, let's do some research together, and then let's check out some different sources. I mean, that's an honest approach to things. And the evidence, like I said, is there. It's overwhelming that I believe that if a person is honest, if they go down that route, they're gonna realize that Christianity is true. Now, whether they decide they want to submit to Christ or not, that's a different story. But I, I just don't know how I've read the books, dude. I've read Richard Dawkins. I've read Sam Harris. I've read, all these popular atheists. I've read the atheists who are smarter than them, who aren't as popular, but who are smarter than the Richard Dawkins and smarter than Sam Harris and smarter than some of these other guys. I've read those books too. And I just don't think they have a leg to stand on.
Yeah. I hear Richard Dawkins is almost memeably quotable by atheists, but
Yeah, he's an embarrassment.
everything I hear from it really just I don't understand why he's so popular because
I forget which. There was an atheist philosopher. I think his name was like Roos or something. I can't remember what his name is. But anyways, he said Richard Dawkins makes me embarrassed to be an atheist. Or something to that effect. He's like, oh my gosh, this guy's an embarrassment. And it's so true, because when you get into the philosophy side of things, that's when it gets more technical. That's when you do have some atheist philosophers. Man, I'll figure this out one day.
You got it.
So you got these atheist philosophers, and you can get in some technical jargon there. If you know how to wade in those waters, you still come out on the other side with a secure faith. But when you get over there, you realize how just ridiculous, like some of these popular level atheists are, and the things that they're saying. You're like, dude, listen, you want a better argument for your position? I can show you a better argument for your position.
Yeah, let me do your job for you.
Yeah, your argument's terrible. So
I've had things that come across in my sleep sometimes that are more profound than what you're saying.
Yeah.
And I think that's one of the things that we're presented with, is that there's so much information out there, and some of it can lead you to Christ, and some of it is there specifically to put things away. And if we're doing, and that's one of the things. If I'm Googling my pastor because I might think he's wrong on a particular topic, I know my kids, and I know that there are other kids out there who are already doing the same thing, because about things that they're challenged about in school on a regular basis. Because now, when I was in high school, it was like, it was unusual. It wasn't unheard of. It was unusual for somebody to come out as gay.
Mm-hmm.
Now we have people who are on hormone blockers because they want to change their gender, or maybe their parents are more invested in that. That's a whole different concept. But and there wasn't any curriculum about that kind of stuff in school when we were in school. But now in school, you have to wonder. I mean, there are things that are out there that are like, hey, you have to believe this. This is a moral thing, and then you are literally killing somebody if you don't agree with that what they're doing is acceptable. And then they're confronted by that, and I think that person is. I don't have a problem with this person. I don't think they're a bad person. I might think they're weird, but I don't think they're a bad person. But everybody says that if I don't think that what they're doing is right, then I'm a hateful person. And it feels like it's when you think about it in that perspective, it feels like it's a hateful thing, and they don't know the difference between something that's hateful and something that that's disappointing, that we don't approve of. You don't because they're a mess of emotions. Teenagers are a mess of emotions. They don't know how to make, everything's everything's in a magnifying glass. They don't know, if they don't like something, they hate it. If they don't like, or if they like something, or then they're absolutely over the moon in love with it. And so they think it's like, man, if I don't agree with what he's doing, that makes me a really bad person. I don't want to be Hitler, right? And that's what they're confronted with every day. And that's something I think that's very new to us in at least recent memory for the past 100 years or so that they're being confronted with. How do we
Yeah,
know?
this is a tough day for young people, especially like in the public school system. And I'm glad I'm not there as a young person. Like you said, there's so many emotions, but at the same time, the devil's very crafty because it is a good thing not to want to be a jerk.
Yeah.
That's like, I feel like that's a good desire that anybody with a half a sense of a moral compass is going to be attentive to. That, yeah, I don't want to be a jerk. I don't want to be mean. I don't want to be hateful. Like, I do want to respect other people and love other people. But then you get this pressure that goes, if you disagree with this person, now you are that jerk. You are that hater. You are
You're the
this,
bad
that, and
guy.
that. Yeah. And it's like, oh, well, okay. Well, then, yeah, I got to support it because that's the right thing to do. And it's like, well, yeah, that's manipulative. That's a lie. And nobody functions like that with anything else in the world, and it's so self-contradictory too, because it's one of those things where, if somebody goes, hey, that person is going to want to, become a transsexual. Do you support that? And I go, nope, I don't support that. I mean, again, I can respect that person, love that person, be friends with that person, and still not support that. And they go, well, if you don't tolerate their views, you're evil. And I go, you're not tolerating my view. Therefore, by your standard, you're evil.
Right.
You're literally a hypocrite. You are literally self-contradictory, but nobody wants to apply that principle back to themselves. So nobody actually lives by that principle. It's just a veiled attack on Christians in order to weaken us, and again, this is why apologetics is necessary, because what I just said was an apologetic argument. I learned it, in the apologetic community, and you can apply it in all sorts of different situations. And now I know how not to be pressured into stupid arguments. And I know how to recognize when people are making contradictory statements. And now I know how to defend my faith in such a way that's still loving and respectful, but also intellectual. And hold to a biblical, worldview and a biblical intellect and a biblical model of love, and it's like,
Mhm.
okay, well, what about the rest of you guys? What are you going to do when somebody pressures you with that or pressures your kid with that? How are you going to respond? And this is why apologetics is necessary, because we don't I always say this, man. I had a sermon I wrote on it one time. We don't live in Jerusalem anymore. We live in Babylon. You worship different in Babylon. You know, you don't do the same things as you did in Jerusalem. So
Yeah. Well, I mean, you can also argue there are parts in Kings and Chronicles where you might as well
yeah,
have been in Babylon at that point. It's the same thing. You were just like I say, if to folks, it's like, look, if you believe in God, you believe in the supernatural, right? Because he has to be a supernatural being to exist. So lots of things are possible that might be beyond your comprehension. The same thing exists with the fight against, good and the fight versus good and evil, right? That stuff is going to be a consistent conflict. You're always presented. You can go day to day presented with different things. I can do this and it's wrong, you know, or I can do this and it's right. If I drive a big pickup and this guy um cuts me off in traffic, I can scare him into running off the road. That would be the bad thing to do, right? But you don't do that. Why? Because you know it's wrong. Not everything is as black and white as that. And you might be just as angry as you are when you're getting cut off on the road. You might be just as angry. And I think that, and it sounds to me like, and it seems pretty obvious, the way that you approach apologetics is something that you would do as an example if your kid was sitting right next to you, listening to you, and the guy asks you a question. Say it's St. Patrick's Day. Oh yeah, I just want to just drink until I get so drunk and pass out and everything. And you're like, I don't think that's really a good idea. You really kind of setting yourself up, Jim. You've got a real problem with alcohol and everything. It's like, well, if you don't like it, you can just go, go take a hike or something, and probably not in that language or anything. But but when you are the calm person in that in that discussion. And I think that's one of the advantages we have as Christians right now is that if we can maintain our composure in a discussion, if you're dealing with somebody who is irrational, um, has a very irrational take, and we often find that these days, they're going to lose their cool once they're presented with you because you're so intolerant. Well, you're not tolerating what my opinion that you find to be intolerant. And then so now you get that feedback loop and they don't like it and they get disgruntled and they end up yelling at you and then your kid sees the other person acting um completely bonkers and they say, oh wow, dad's handling this really well. And then you get in the car or you walk away and you're like, all right, son, we're gonna let me then now you have your opportunity. Now we can break this down for you. And then
Yeah,
set
you
you up.
you don't have to get emotional when you have facts on your side. When you have facts and reason on your side, and generally, what always happens is you get somebody who regurgitates a talking point. You present evidence that contradicts that talking point, then they attack your person, which is an ad hominem argument.
Mhm.
And then you point out that they're attacking your person rather than the argument, and then they attack your person more. and, then
Yeah.
you, and then you realize that you have won the discussion. Unfortunately, you have not won them, but that's not necessarily always on you. But that's what happens a lot of times. And you have to be prepared for that. Again, like that's the nature of evangelism and witnessing for Jesus is that people are not going to like you all the time.
That's a big struggle for me because I'm so very passionate about it, and I'm so very tired of it at this point. Trying to hearing it from our end, because we have to deal with um, the modernization crowd within every denomination that exists. But you have to deal with it there. You have to deal with it in the media. You got to deal with everybody saying it. And I feel like sometimes I'm just so very tired of trying to defend it that when somebody does it, and I feel so very passionate about this thing that I just want to fly off the handle and be like, no, no, this is stupid. This is why it's so stupid. And then, just by my own personality, I start to look, I might be a little bit agitated, but really just animated about it. But now I look like a madman. And so that's
Hmm.
something that, I should, that I should probably take an example of um, to be more calm, and I think that might be a good point of apologetics. It's not just what you're saying; it's how you're saying it. Because the apologetic is it's to me it's not just the words; it's the act, it's the action of making the point. How are you making your point? Are you doing it as a teacher would talk to you, or are you doing it as a raving lunatic? How that's going to change how people um that's going to change how uh, people perceive it. And kids are very perceptive beings. And if you're a parent, you know this very well because you've been in like me, you've been in traffic and somebody said something and you said something and you forgot that the little one was back there. And the next thing you know, they say it to the next car that passes, and you're like, let's not tell mom
Yeah.
any of this. Let's not discuss this with her. I didn't know you were back there. Um, or you're working on something. These are all things that have never happened to me. Oh, you're working on the car and the bolt won't come loose, and so you say something at it to make it to make it get loose on its own.
Or you throw the wrench at it and you kick the tire.
And the kid,
Yeah.
your son's just sitting there going, "Oh, this is how this works."
That's how you react when you get mad. Okay. I
You,
see now.
this is how dad works on cars,
Yeah. Then they take it
and
to a whole new level.
I can't wait. My son is walking in a better path so far than me. I was in a lot more trouble than he was as a kid, and so that's a promising aspect. I hope maybe
Yeah.
maybe I don't know. As long as he ends up in a good spot. So I guess in the end, to start to wrap this up, it sounds to me from what you've had to say here is that it's our youth are not to be treated like they're dumb, but you do need to treat them as people who are easily influenced, not just by you, but by media. So that takes that impression. But we also need to be mindful of how we approach that. And like in what you said about Know your audience. There's a difference between middle schoolers, and a little bit more with high schoolers, but then college level kids, um, they've got their own they've got their own approach for things, and if it's you got to be mindful of what you're doing there in order to succeed.
Yeah, one of the biggest things that I try to impress upon all the kids that were in my youth group, because I knew like they might forget a lot of the specific things that I say, but I'm going to make sure they don't forget this. And it was a saying, and I used to repeat it all the time, to the point where it became like a joke amongst the group. And but it's good because then I knew that they remembered it, and it was be a filter, not a sponge. And I used to say that ad nauseum. And I got kids that were in that youth group who I still talk to today, and they remember that.
That's a
Be a
really good one.
filter, not a sponge.
I'm gonna steal that one because that's
All right, you just got to footnote it.
yeah.
Footnote it, okay? Give me the credit. Just kidding.
So as parents, because we've been talking to this mostly as teachers with a parent perspective. If you're a parent and you're bringing the first part of all this is bring your kid to church with you. If you're going, if you're not going to church and you want them to have these values, you've got to get them into church, because they're going to be, unless you're at home and you're homeschooling them curriculum, which I doubt is going on. That's going to be where they get some influence, and they're not just getting influence; they're getting influence from somebody who's not you. So they don't walk out of the house and be like, "Well, the only person who ever taught me this is my dad," and now, my professor, who's very smart, he has all these framed things, written things on the wall. He's telling me that my dad's an idiot.
Yep.
And so maybe he was wrong. It gets them out of there, and it sets the example as well when you're going to church and you're bringing them with them, that you take it seriously and that you care that they take it seriously. So if they say, "Oh, I want to play video games," or "Oh, I'm too tired," or "Oh, I want to do something else, it's boring." No, make them get up and make them go. And they might hate it, but when they get to that point of their life in their mid to late 20s, when they look back and they go, "Oh, everything my parents did, they did for a reason, and they had a good reason behind it." They take that into account as well. And we have many people who have come on this program, just this small program itself, who said, "Hey, I didn't take faith seriously, or I didn't believe, and I went through all this." And then in their mid 20s or 30s, that's when the light came on, and they either came back or they came to it. If you set that foundation, you've given them something to stand on when they realize, or when they start to get over themselves out of that terrible 20s era, and they start to go, I'm a reasonable, rational human being. What is my place in the world? What does all this have to do? You've got that foundation, and they know that you're a phone call away, or they know that they can go to a church and they can start, what to look for. What was so great? Then that's the other thing, picking a church with a good community. I know what I had that was supportive and meaningful and fulfilling. So now I know what to look for. So the best part about it, I guess the first step in apologetics, is getting your foot in the door, taking your faith seriously, taking your church life seriously as well.
That's right.
Okay, so like I said, I'm wrapping this up. Billy's got a YouTube channel. It's called Dyer Conversations. It's got several well thought out videos on there where he takes on a number of different topics. I think one of the more recent ones was the Catholic baptism issue that kind of made the headlines here. So sounds like you're talking about some current event stuff, and also some just mainstream with what's going to go. What are you generally thinking about as you go through life? So
yeah, I try to provide some teaching in there, for Christians who do take their faith seriously. I've been blessed to been able to study a lot, and I like to study, and I know that not everybody either has a desire nor has the time, but still wants to know the information. So, I figured, hey, if I can provide an avenue where you could throw that video on, or that the audio version, because I'm on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, stuff like that, you could throw that on while you're driving down the road, or washing dishes, or doing something else. You can listen to this for 20 minutes and get a synopsis of that book rather than having to spend a few weeks reading it. Or, there's something that happened and you don't really know, well, how would a Christian answer that? How would respond to that? And then, I've tried to provide some biblical wisdom there. So I do what I can. Hopefully it's helped some people out. I've got some good feedback from it, so I'm enjoying it thus far.
Excellent. Excellent. Well, that'll conclude our live stream tonight, coming in almost at an even 1 hour like we were planning on it. So, folks, like I said, if you like what you heard today, I'm pretty sure that we're going to have some more collaborations, at least on this channel, and that you will be hearing them again if you do ever get the chance to. Because I know I've got a lot of people who do watch after the stream is over who are local in the area. If you get a chance to see him preach at your local church, definitely don't miss it. He's very thought provoking, and I've heard, and he's good at coming up with approaching things at angles that at least me I haven't thought of before. So it's always good. It's always good to get that extra angle in there, because you pick up those little extra nuggets of ideas that when you're talking to somebody about Christ, and maybe they're not picking it up the way that it makes best sense to you. Maybe you change gears on them, and you find that little avenue in there. So, with that said, everybody, tomorrow we'll be picking back up with the fabulous and very very rich narrative of Numbers. But I promise you guys, there is some exciting parts of Numbers. There's actually a rebellion that takes place. There's some godly divine wrath that happens, and so there will be some things. People will get punished. It's not pretty. It's actually very tragic, but it does kind of tend to get people's attention. So with that said, everybody, have a good evening. Be safe, and God bless.